Hello there everyone, your fluffy armchair Admiral Latur is back with some more hot ship action. Today's episode of Lots of Guns, we are finally going to take a look at one of the historical ships that I've tried to recreate in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. It's not fully exact recreation, but it is as best recreation as I could possibly make. And don't blame me for any historical mismatches between what I'm doing and what I managed to build and actual ship that was built, because what I'm trying to do on my channel is to from time to time try to recreate historical designs in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. Obviously I'm focusing mostly on ships that were actually laid down, commissioned and built and actually served in active service, instead of focusing on ships that were only drafted on a drawing board. So it is very hard for me to find some ships from certain nations. Like for example, today's feature is focusing around Russian Navy. To be more exact, Imperial Russian Navy. So we are going to look at First World War pre-Dreadnought design. Sisoy Veliki, who served during World War One, or actually, she didn't serve in World War One. She was built, commissioned, and sorted out, basically far before World War One was even considered, and far before anyone even thought that there will be a great war. So it's actually not World War One design. Anyway, so it was a mistake on my part, or misspelling. Anyway, let's get back to this design. She was commissioned in 1896. So it was still 19th century. One of the very first ironclad ships. And I won't be lying, it was not the best built ship ever. I'm afraid that Russians were known from quite poor quality of their metalworks and such. And as such, this ship was actually built absolutely awfully. It was absolutely terrible, I'm not going to lie. There were multiple things that failed throughout the service of the ship, and the crews and the captain was trying to do their best to actually fix those issues using pretty much duct tape and anything they could find to keep that vessel afloat. Obviously, I might be a little bit exaggerating because ships survived several years at sea, and she served in multiple areas and actually managed to take some actions in some wars and suffered some casualties and such. But there were multiple technical issues with those ships, and unfortunately Russian craftsmanship was very poor at that time. Navy was well underfunded, and it was crammed with basically favoritism and such. So Admiralty was actually pushing bad ideas forward just for the sake of pushing them forward and impress their superiors. So things were not working exactly as they should. Anyway, enough of that introduction. Let's talk about the build. I've already managed to pre-build the ship. You should be able to slowly see it on your screens right about now, because I'm actually switching to this scene. Right, so as you can see, the ship is built as it is. We got two double 12-inch gun mounts, one at the fore and one at the aft end of the ship. There's also six 6-inch casemate guns mounted in single turrets, 3 on each side of the ship, and that is complemented with 12 2-inch guns in 12 single mounts mounted in around the ship. That is pretty much it. Oh yeah, there is also 6 15-inch torpedo tubes. And that is basically it when it comes to armament. The last few bits to say about it is that we used ballistic as a propellant because Russian Navy at that time was already using smokeless gunpowder, and unfortunately ballistic turns out to be the best choice for us. The only available smokeless gunpowder at that time. Right. When it comes to displacement, we went far above what the historical ship did. Historically, that ship just barely surpassed 10,500 tons. Unfortunately, our construction is pretty much at 13,600 tons. So we went way overweight, but that might be also because I'm not exactly using the same hull. Some of the armaments present on that ship turns out to be heavier than they are supposed to be. So there's nothing I can do. I can just try to balance all the things as best as I could to at least give imitation of what historically was built. So we went quite above the historical values in that regard. The ship was able to reach 15.7 knots. It was designed for about 16 knots, so it was slower than it was intended to be. The range of Russian battleships was not the greatest, to be fair, because they were mostly built to serve in their own home areas. Initially, Sysoy Veliki was built for Baltic Fleet. However, shortly after she was commissioned, she was sent to Mediterranean Sea. But we will talk about that later. Let's now focus on the build itself. When it comes to bulkheads, at that time, torpedo protection or building ships with torpedo protection was definitely not a thing. So we put just a few bulkheads to give some basic compartments inside, perhaps a little bit more protected. With range being short, because that ship couldn't sail for longer distances and it needed quite a lot of coal to actually be able to reach different and various parts of the world. When it comes to engine, she used triple expansion steam engine, coal-fired boilers. I'm not sure if they were like heavy boilers or if they were like high-powered boilers. But for the sake of our build, to compensate for lack of funnels, because we got only 2 of them, I had to rely on induced draft boilers to put engine efficiency at 100%. in order to reach that 15.5 knots. I could eventually design the ship for 16 knots and give worse funnel setup, and that would pretty much imitate the real performance of the ship, or much more real performance of that ship. When it comes to protection, the ship was protected by nickel steel armor, with barbette being about 10-inch thick, which classes it as a standard barbette thickness, I believe. There was some sort of anti-torpedo belt protection, the most basic one, which is already installed on the ship. Partially, the ship also had double hull bottom, and that is installed in that build. I'm not sure about bulkheads, if they were standard or reinforced, so I just relied on standard. Anyway, if I would try to install reinforced, I would go way overweight, so I need to make that small sacrifice. I'm not sure about what kind of anti-flood systems were introduced. That's why I just used anti-flooding one with connection to the few bulkheads that we have. So any sort of torpedo hit will most likely take us down. I'm not going to lie, we need to be very, very careful to not get hit by a torpedo. I also gave that ship some basic citadel protection. I'm not sure how exactly that corresponds to real ship. It had some internal compartments, armor reinforced, hence why I put some sort of citadel on. We are going to use standard shells with standard load. As I already before mentioned, we are going to use ballistic as a propellant, because at that time the guns that were used on that ship, which were 12-inch 40 caliber guns, or 40 caliber naval guns to be exact, were used with smokeless gunpowder. On top of that, 15-inch standard propulsion torpedoes are also installed on that ship. As we are using pretty much slightly later design of this ship, it didn't went through actual like a full refit. However, at one point she went to dry dock for very, very urgent and heavy repairs, and she was also slightly refit, and she received rangefinders. So I've installed some of that vessel as well. They were initially not present, from what I know, or rangefinders that were initially installed were much worse than the ones that I might be using, even though I can use only first generation of rangefinders. Right, when it comes to armor thickness, the main belt was 14-inch thick. Actually, partially in those reinforced areas, belt could reach up to 16-inch in total, hence why that citadel will actually play its role. Extended belts varied between like 8 and 9 inch. However, I used belt extended as a lowest value of belt armor, which was 6 inch. If I would install any thicker extended belt, I would go way overweight anyway, so I need to make that small sacrifice. Deck was from 2.5 inch to 3 inch thick, so not much of a deck protection. However, at those times nobody considered plunging fire as an actual thing or as actual threat. Everyone believes that ships should have tons and lots of guns. And they should basically have massive side armor to survive like a short range hit from a large caliber guns. Obviously that was not a thing, and most of the ships had insufficient armor to survive hits from a massive and big main battery guns, and fights were being fought at very, very low distances anyway. We are talking about distances of less than 10 kilometers. When it comes to conning tower, it was very lightly armored. 9-inch is not super impressive, I would say, compared to later battleship designs, which reached like 15-16 inch of conning tower armor. 9-inch seems very, very low. It's much lower than a belt armor, in fact. Turret fronts were protected by 12-inch of armor, which is quite thick. It's pretty much equal to gun caliber. Turret tops were 2.5-inch thick, and casemates, and in fact in this case secondaries, because they are pretty much connected in the game and I don't have enough casemate mounts to install all those 2-inch guns inside of them. We are using standard secondary guns to fulfill the amount of those 2-inch guns anyway. Secondaries are protected by 5-inch of armor. And that is pretty much it. There's not much else to say about the build itself. We are going to take this fine lady for a spin and see if we can feed 2 Japanese battleships in a 2 versus 2 duel. But before we begin the battle, I would like to remind you that this video should definitely receive a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to get notification every time I upload a new content on YouTube. Finally, don't forget to share your comments down below the video. Right, so let's begin the battle. And while we are in the battle, as it will probably be moderately interesting to watch, I will tell you a little bit about this ship's history. But let me just first get my fleet sorted so I can eventually go in the right direction. Where is enemy? I just missed that message that was saying where the enemy is. And it turns out 10 kilometers is way above the spotting range of those ships. This is a bit problematic. Even though my 12-inch guns have 16.4 kilometer range, I can't effectively use that range because enemy that is 10 kilometers away is way too far. Right. Where are you? Can I please receive some sort of report, perhaps? Any sighting of enemies? Oh, there we go. Enemy is to the north. So let's turn my formation to the north. Put some time compression on so that my fleet can turn around. Oh dear. Yeah, Sisoi Veliki slowed down to 4.5 knots. That is quite annoying bug that's related to ships being in formation or in a group or a division. Whenever you detach the ships or attach ships from to a division, they tend to have some speed issues, and they pretty much stop dead in the water for a while, and you have to like restart the engines, because apparently attaching and detaching from like a battle group makes a lot of difference to the ship's speed. Right, we managed to gain first sightings of the enemy. Enemy is actually rushing towards us, which is very good. That will shorten the battle definitely. So we can focus a little bit on the ship's history. So, as I mentioned before, shortly after the ship was commissioned, she was tasked to join a Mediterranean squadron. And here's the funny story. Before she even managed to reach her destination, during her first voyage to Mediterranean Sea, multiple technical faults were discovered, and that will open a list of different issues. I got 3 of them listed. So, lack of ventilation in steering compartment was so appalling that the captain invested his own money to buy electric fans. The electrical systems were failing multiple times before the ship even reached Gibraltar. And the copper rings for sealing bullseye windows, so those are those windows on the side of the ships, those round ones, were actually left at Kronstadt, and they weren't found for about a year. Eventually the crew managed to apply some temporary fixes to those issues when the ship finally reached the port of Piraeus, which is very, very well, it's in Greece, in fact. So the ship had to sail quite a long way from like Baltic Sea to Mediterranean Sea, in fact, before any issues were resolved. Anyway, after joining the squadron, the ship was ordered to join the international squadron during naval blockade of Crete. And during the blockade, the ship went through gunnery exercise at Sauda Bay. After those exercises, she was ordered to assist during international expedition at Serino Castelli, where I think Ottoman army was rescued from some sort of rebels or something. I don't remember the exact story behind it. However, pretty much Sisoi Veliki had to send their sailors to do some job at land, along with other crews from other international vessels that were present in the area. Anyway, after returning to Soda Bay, Sisoi Veliki performed her second gunnery exercise, and that didn't go well. Remember when I told you that ship suffered from multiple failures? Well, one of such failures occurred during loading one of the rear guns in rear main turret, and the breech couldn't fully close, and that eventually resulted in internal explosion, because nobody actually checked the breech before trying to fire the guns, and that is not the best idea ever. Anyway, because of that explosion, 16 crew members died instantly. 15 of them were wounded, out of which 6 died later. And the ship was sent to Toulon for repairs. During the repairs, French engineers again openly criticized poor quality of Russian work. Russian investigators also reported multiple faults in workmanship and design that deemed ship unfit for sailing. However, the St. Petersburg admirals dismissed those concerns and argued that those design flaws were in fact intended and needed, and other minor faults can be repaired by the crew during their spare time. Fun times, isn't it? Everyone should be happy to have so caring commanders, I guess. Anyway, eventually the ship spent, I think, 9 months in repairs. So after those were finished, Sisoi Veliki was dispatched to Far East. Her voyage went mostly uneventful, and apart from being shadowed by HMS Victorious until she ran aground near Port Said, nothing else has happened. Few months later, during her voyage towards Vladivostok, the ship unfortunately had to stop at port of Nagasaki to go through some repairs, because there were multiple faults by that time. So eventually she reached Vladivostok. Somehow, I'm not sure how, but yeah, they did it. Anyway, in year 1900, took part in landing exercise that heated up the Boxer Rebellion in China. And that forced Russia to intervene. Later on, the crew of the ship was sent to defend embassy in Beijing. And this resulted in 3 crew members being KIA, 1 dead of disease, and 12 wounded. Not a bad thing. Well, I would say not a bad result, considering that I think they defended for a couple of days in that embassy. So it's not a terrible result. Anyway, in December 1901, the amount of mechanical problems that occurred and that were present on the ship was so overwhelming that crews were unable to repair them anymore. And that forced the ship to be sent back to the Baltic Sea. In 1902, when the ship finally arrived to the Baltic Sea and spent some time in ports and probably served in local operations or patrols, the ship was undergoing a review following, I think, some French president's visit. Anyway, that resulted that the ship was finally sent to dry dock in Kronstadt for very needed repairs and modifications. Well, that would be the thing. Unfortunately, because all available financing was diverted to fund new Borodino class, the speed and quality of said repairs and modifications was very poor. And probably those would never be finished, in fact, if Japan wouldn't enter the war with Russia. So now we are getting to Russo-Japanese War. So when it broke out, Admiralty has actually put some extra effort and pushed towards those repairs being completed. And how they did that was by cutting all unnecessary work, which eventually left the ship in even more questionable state, because many of the planned and very needed works in order to fix or remove the issues were actually cancelled, because that's how Russians do cut unnecessary works, or how they did that back in the days. So on August 1904, the ship sailed with rest of Pacific Squadron for her last voyage. Or for something that's eventually turned out to be her last voyage. So, we are jumping forwards to January 1905, when the Pacific Squadron has reached Madagascar. Somehow they managed to sail all the way down there from like Baltic Sea, if I remember correctly. And they remained in Madagascar for about 2 months. During that time, ships went through some series of exercises and such, and throughout gunnery exercise, Sisoi Veliki actually managed to, well, Sisoi Veliki's crew managed to best crews from newer Borodino class ships, and they actually proved to be much more accurate compared to such, even though the ship was heavily outdated. Anyway, after those 2 months of exercises in Madagascar, the ships finally began their final stretch of the journey towards Vladivostok. And during first stretch of that journey, Sisoi Veliki suffered from, well, you guessed it, multiple technical issues, and that basically caused entire squadron to significantly slow down. I think the average speed that they moved was 7 knots. And that basically caused the entire squadron to be so slow that it took them 28 days to reach Kamran Bay. Throughout that 28 days, Sisoi Veliki suffered from 12 failures of boiler tubes and heat exchangers, and at least 4 failures of steering gears, which is very, very bad, I'd say. But, well, Admiralty had better idea, I guess. Anyway, we are jumping forward to actual end of or final battle of Sisoi Veliki, because on 14th of May 1905, the squadron began another stretch of their journey towards Vladivostok, and they were approaching Tsushima. On 15th of May, the first Japanese ships were sighted, and Sisoi Veliki's last battle has actually begun. So, during first day of encounter, she suffered from multiple attacks and hits. Pretty much same as many other Russian ships, because as it turns out, Japanese Navy was way more accurate than Russian Navy, but that is a story for I guess maybe different times or different channel. I think Drachnifel covered Battle of Tsushima quite extensively, and you should totally check out his video on that topic. He actually mentioned about multiple things that I'm covering in this video, and I'm just covering one ship. Anyway, going to the list of damages and like very brief battle report. At first, her bow torpedo tube was damaged by a large caliber shell that exploded next to her bow. Then she suffered from another 2 direct hits on bow belt armor that caused flooding. Within next hour from those 2 hits, a ship was hit multiple times, causing fires and damages to front turrets and casemates. I think hydraulics from for the front turret was destroyed. Casemates were on fire, and there was no water supply because they were actually cut by said hits as well. Right. Anyway, ship has fallen back to a second line, and crews performed some urgent and immediate repairs. So they managed to extinguish the fires, and eventually by the end of the day she managed to rejoin the battle with a very heavy list to port, because by that time ship have took a lot of water, which definitely didn't help her later on. Oh, I just suffered from internal explosion in the game, from what I can see. Imperiatista Ekaterina Velikaya is unfortunately going down under, and I believe she won't be able to recover from that massive internal explosion. And yes, she is now sinking. Right, so it's just Sisoi Veliki that is left against 2 Japanese adversaries. Let's see if she is able to turn the tides on this battle. Anyway, let's get back to the story. Right, we are almost done. Where we are, yes, after she returned from the second line, she continued fighting along battleship line, and in late evening the same day, which was still 15th of May 1905, the ship suffered from 3 destroyer attacks between 7 and I think 11 p.m. She managed to defend against 2 of those attacks. Those were very short range attacks. I think the distance was around 600 yards, so that's a really close distance. Anyway, she managed to defend from 2 of those attacks. However, third attack proven to be successful and resulted in a direct torpedo hit, and that damaged Sisoi Veliki's propulsion. Ship was not able to sustain stable speed anymore, and she was also taking on water. And at around 3 a.m. on 16th of May 1905, the captain of the ship ordered all stop, and at around 7 a.m. he surrendered the ship to 2 Japanese armed merchant cruisers. Initially, Japanese wanted to capture and tow the ship back to their port. They ordered the Japanese flag to be put on the masts, and when they tried to take down the Russian flag, they refused to do so. However, Japanese forces were still under control of the ship, and they were trying to tow that ship back to their port as a prize. Unfortunately, the damage was so severe that they had to forfeit that plan, and eventually all they did was to take the Russian prisoners on board of their ships, and at around 10 a.m. Of 16th of May 1905, Sisoi Veliki has capsized and sunk still flying Russian flag, because Japanese took the flag with them before they left Sisoi Veliki's deck. During the battle, the final death toll on Sisoi Veliki was 47, and 613 remaining were rescued and taken prisoners by Japan. That pretty much ends the story of that ship. As you've probably noticed, it was quite full of mostly not battle wounds and scars from various battles. Obviously the ship suffered from some crew loss throughout the service, but the biggest enemy of that ship was poor craftsmanship and ignorance of the Admiralty. The design wasn't bad, and at that time it was pretty relevant. Ships weren't badly armored and such. However, the craftsmanship of shipbuilders, the bad quality control, and lack of care about quality resulted in that ship being real pain in the ass for their own crew, and eventually ship wasn't able to stand out to a fight with Japanese fleet, and sunk in Battle of Tsushima. Anyway, enough of the stories. Let's focus on this battle. I'm not sure if I'm able to turn the tide of this battle. I will turn towards Asahi in hope to eventually finish her off. Two of my torpedoes are heading towards Kasagi. However, I don't think I'm going to be able to hit her with either one of them. Yeah, unfortunately, none of my torpedoes is going to hit. However, my main guns have just caused a flooding on Kasagi, and hopefully that is going to be enough for her to take enough water and sink. I will put some speed into this game, because there is no point to extend this battle even longer than it has to be. So time compression of 2 times should be sufficient for now. I managed to start bouncing some shots when I focused on maneuvering, which is very good. And Sisoi Veliki, well, she doesn't seem to be in the best condition ever. However, she should be well enough to keep on fighting for now at least. I just fired another torpedo in direction of Kasagi, and hopefully this one will hit, and it looks like it's going to do so. Is it going to be enough to take down the Kasagi? I don't think so, because the affected area is the rear compartments that are already flooded. And yes, Kasagi keeps on pumping out water despite my efforts to take her down. I will attempt to turn a little bit. In fact, Sisoi Veliki managed to pump out the water, which is very good. Kasagi keeps pumping out the water slowly but steadily. I do hope that I'm going to finally hit Kasagi and at least sink her. I'm going to take a very risky action and try to overtake her in attempt to fire a torpedoes at a short range, and it appears that I succeeded, and 2 torpedoes have just hit Kasagi causing massive flooding in front sections, and that turns out to be enough to take her down. Can I carry on and perform a successful torpedo attack on Asahi? That is a good question. I will try to turn the tide on this battle and eventually come out victorious. However, don't take my word for it, because it's really hard to do so. Enemy has some advantage over me. I still got some torpedoes left, and they are more than good enough to actually take down Asahi. But I need to take very risky action again. I will head on towards enemy. I won't be testing ramming mechanics, even though it's very tempting. But I do hope that these 2 torpedoes will be enough to sink Asahi. We caused massive flooding and she is going down. She is going down rapidly. 3, 2, 1, and we succeeded, even though Asahi in her last attempt caused an ammo detonation on board of our ship. I won't be repeating this battle, however it was really exciting. It ended up successful on our part, and well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. We succeeded on our virtual battle where original ship have failed, so I consider that a massive success. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you want to get informed about my new uploads, hit that notification bell button and don't forget to share your comments down below. Have a great day and see you all later. Later. Out.